Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. This is my story, one I never thought I'd share, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it. What happened to me changed everything I believed in about love, trust, and betrayal. So here it goes. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hummed, a dull, monotonous sound that seemed to echo the cavernous emptiness hollowing out inside me. Just moments before, I'd been on cloud nine, the proudest new dad in the world, or so I thought. Now, a single, casually dropped sentence from a well-meaning doctor had shattered my universe into a million jagged pieces. I stood there, frozen, the cheerful blue teddy bear I'd bought for the baby, slipping from my numb fingers. It hit the polished linoleum floor with a soft thud, a sound that was deafening in the sudden silence of my world. My wife, Mia, was in the room down the hall, recovering, her mother, Carol, fussing over her. They didn't know I knew. Not yet. But the doctor's words about neonatal alloimmune thrombocytopenia, a rare condition linked to an incompatibility between paternal antigens and maternal platelets, and a specific antigen I knew for a fact I didn't carry, were like a key turning in a lock I never even realized existed. A lock that opened onto a chasm of deceit. Mia and I had been together for 10 years, married for 7. We were that couple, the one everyone said was rock solid. We'd met in college, a whirlwind romance that settled into a comfortable, loving partnership. We built a life together, brick by brick. The small suburban house with the slightly overgrown garden, the mismatched coffee mugs, the shared dreams of a future filled with laughter and, eventually, children. I loved Mia with an intensity that sometimes scared me. She was my everything, my best friend, my confidant, my lover. Her laughter was the soundtrack to my happiest memories. Her smile, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes, could make my day every single time. We'd had our ups and downs, like any couple. There were arguments about whose turn it was to do the dishes and anxieties about finances, but never, not once, had I questioned her loyalty or her love for me. Infidelity was something that happened to other people, a plot point in movies, a whispered scandal about a distant acquaintance. It wasn't something that could touch us, or so I believed. Her mother, Carol, had always been a significant presence in our lives. Initially, I'd appreciated her involvement. She was helpful, especially when we were first starting out, offering advice, an extra pair of hands with home projects, and a seemingly endless supply of baked goods. Mia was her only daughter, and they were incredibly close, a bond I'd once found endearing. Carol was a widow, her husband having passed away when Mia was young, and I think, in a way, Mia and I became her whole world. She was at our house several times a week, sometimes invited, sometimes just dropping by. Looking back, there were moments when her constant presence felt a little suffocating. She had opinions on everything, from the way I loaded the dishwasher to the career choices Mia made. But Mia always defended her, saying, "That's just mom, she means well." And I, wanting to keep the peace, wanting to be a good husband and son-in-law, had always acquiesced, brushed aside my mild annoyances. I told myself it was part of the package, part of loving Mia. I never imagined Carol could be anything other than a loving, if slightly overbearing, mother and mother-in-law. The thought that she could be complicit in a betrayal of this magnitude was simply inconceivable. The pregnancy had been a surprise, but a joyous one. We hadn't been actively trying, but we talked about starting a family soon. Mia had been feeling a bit off for a couple of weeks, tired, a little nauseous. I joked about her catching the bug that was going around the office. Then, one morning, she'd come into the bathroom while I was shaving, her face pale but her eyes shining, a positive pregnancy test clutched in her hand. The rush of emotion I felt in that moment was overwhelming. Joy, excitement, a touch of terror at the monumental change ahead. We'd hugged, laughed, maybe even cried a little. It felt like the beginning of a beautiful new chapter. I threw myself into preparations with gusto. I read parenting books, assembled the crib with painstaking care, painted the nursery a soft, gender-neutral yellow. I talked to the baby through Mia's belly, telling it about my day, singing silly songs. I went to every doctor's appointment, my heart swelling with pride each time I saw the grainy ultrasound image or heard the steady beat of the tiny heart. Mia seemed happy too, though, in hindsight, perhaps her joy was a little more subdued than mine, a little more guarded. I'd attributed it to pregnancy hormones, to the anxieties that naturally come with expecting your first child. Any flicker of doubt, any whisper of unease, I'd pushed away. Why would I suspect anything? This was Mia, my Mia. Carol was, of course, ecstatic. She ramped up her involvement, if that was even possible. She was constantly bringing over baby clothes, offering unsolicited advice on everything from breastfeeding to birth plans. She'd look at Mia with this expression of profound, almost conspiratorial tenderness. I'd thought it was just a mother's love, a grandmother's anticipation. Now, the memory of those looks sent a chill down my spine. Were they sharing a secret then, a secret that excluded me, that was built on my ignorance and their deception? The timeline of the pregnancy had always seemed a little fuzzy, if I was truly honest with myself. When we tried to pinpoint the conception date, Mia had been vague, brushing it off with a laugh, saying, "Does it really matter? We're having a baby." And I, caught up in the excitement, had agreed. It didn't matter. Until now. Now, it mattered more than anything else in the world. The doctor's words about the baby's rare condition and the genetic markers involved had drawn a very clear, very stark line. A line that showed the baby couldn't possibly be mine. The due date, the slightly premature birth, things I hadn't questioned, now clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The past 9 months, a period I'd cherished as one of the happiest of my life, replayed in my mind. But this time, they were tainted, twisted into a grotesque charade. My excitement, my love, my devotion, all of it had been a lie, built on a foundation of their making. The teddy bear on the floor seemed to mock me, a symbol of my naivety, my blind trust. I bent down, picked it up, its soft fur a stark contrast to the cold, hard knot of betrayal tightening in my chest. I had to face them. I had to hear it from her lips. The walk down that corridor towards Mia's room was the longest, most agonizing walk of my life. Each step felt like wading through concrete, the anticipation of the confrontation, the inevitable explosion of our carefully constructed world, pressing down on me. The door to Mia's room was slightly ajar. I could hear their voices, soft, murmuring. Carol was probably telling Mia what a wonderful mother she'd be. The irony was a bitter pill. I pushed the door open, my hand trembling slightly. They both looked up, surprise flickering across their faces, quickly replaced by smiles. Mia was propped up in bed, looking tired but radiant. The baby, the child I had thought was mine, was asleep in a clear plastic bassinet beside her. For a split second, seeing her like that, the familiar surge of love and protectiveness welled up, almost making me doubt what I'd heard. Almost. But the doctor's calm, clinical explanation had been too precise, too definitive. Carol started to say something, probably a cheerful greeting, but the look on my face must have stopped her. My carefully constructed composure was cracking, the turmoil inside me beginning to show. I didn't say anything at first, just stood there, the teddy bear clutched in my hand, my gaze fixed on Mia. Her smile faltered, a flicker of unease, then fear in her eyes. She knew. She knew I knew. Or at least, she knew something was terribly wrong. The air in the room grew thick, charged with unspoken words, with the weight of a truth that was about to detonate. I looked at the tiny, innocent baby, a life just beginning, already entangled in a web of adult deceit. A profound sadness washed over me, for the baby, for myself, for the life I thought we had. Then, the sadness began to curdle, replaced by a cold, rising anger. I had been played monumentally. And her mother, the woman who was supposed to be family, had been in on it. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated, 9-month-long deception, A conspiracy that involved faking the most intimate and sacred experience a couple can share. The hospital, a place of new beginnings, had just become the stage for the end of my world. I remember my voice when I finally spoke. It was eerily calm, a stark contrast to the hurricane raging inside me. "We need to talk," I said, my eyes locking onto Mia's. Her face, which had been flushed with the glow of new motherhood, turned ashen. Carol stiffened, her usual cheerful demeanor vanishing, replaced by a hard, defensive expression. She opened her mouth, probably to intervene, to manage the situation as she always did, but I cut her off with a look. This was between me and Mia, or at least it would start that way. The room felt like it was shrinking, the bright, cheerful decorations suddenly mocking. The little pink and blue balloons tied to the bedpost, the "It's a girl/boy" banner someone had hung, they all seemed like props in a cruel play where I was the unwitting fool. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments, the inconsistencies, the moments of doubt I had brushed aside. Mia's sudden, unexplained weekend trips to visit old college friends months ago. The hushed phone calls she'd end abruptly when I walked into the room. Her increased secrecy around her phone and laptop. At the time, I chalked it up to stress, to her needing space, to my own paranoia. I'd wanted to trust her, so I had. Implicitly. Utterly. And this was my reward. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable. Mia just stared at me, her eyes wide, tears beginning to well. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. In her silence, in her crumbling expression, was the confession I both dreaded and needed to hear. The first crack in the dam had appeared, and I knew a flood of ugly truths was about to be unleashed. My life, as I knew it, was over. And it ended right here, in this sterile hospital room, with the scent of antiseptic and betrayal heavy in the air. The baby stirred in its sleep, a tiny, innocent sound that cut through the tension like a knife. A wave of emotions washed over me, a pang of what could have been, a deep sorrow for this child born into such a mess, and a renewed surge of anger at the two women who had orchestrated this entire charade. Mia finally broke the silence, her voice a mere whisper, choked with tears. "Mark, I can explain." Explain? How could she possibly explain this? How could she explain making me believe I was going to be a father, letting me invest all my love, hope, and dreams into a child that wasn't mine? How could she explain looking me in the eyes every day for 9 months, knowing she was living a lie? And her mother, Carol, standing there beside her, her face a mask of feigned concern, but her eyes darting nervously between Mia and me. She was part of it. The doctor's words had implicated the father, but the conspiracy to hide it, to pass this child off as mine, that was all of them. The full weight of it began to settle on me, crushing me. It wasn't just the affair, it was the premeditation, the sustained deception, the absolute disregard for my feelings, for my life. The casual cruelty of it all was breathtaking. I had been a pawn in their game, a means to an end. What end? I wasn't sure yet, but the devastation was absolute. My heart, which had been overflowing with joy just an hour ago, now felt like a leaden weight in my chest. The journey ahead was going to be brutal. I knew that much. But in that moment, all I could focus on was the raw, searing pain of their betrayal. The foundation of my marriage, of my life, had been dynamited, and I was left standing in the rubble, wondering how I would ever rebuild. Carol finally found her voice, stepping forward slightly, her tone attempting to be placating, yet with an underlying steeliness I now recognized as manipulative. "Mark, dear, perhaps we should discuss this later. Mia needs her rest. This isn't the time or the place." Her attempt to control the narrative, even now, was astounding. She was trying to protect Mia, to shield her from the immediate consequences, to manage the fallout. Just like she'd helped manage the pregnancy, the lies, the entire illusion. I turned to her, my voice low and dangerous, a tone I rarely used, a tone she had certainly never heard from me. "Oh, I think this is exactly the time and the place, Carol. And you're going to be part of this conversation too. You helped her. You knew all along, didn't you? Her face paled slightly, but her chin remained defiantly lifted. She exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance with Mia, a silent communication that spoke volumes about their alliance. That glance, that tiny, fleeting moment of solidarity between them, was like another twist of the knife. It confirmed her complicity beyond any doubt. They were in this together, and I was the outsider, the victim of their carefully constructed deceit. The happy family portrait we had presented to the world was a fraud, a meticulously crafted lie, and they were the artists. My world had not just been shattered, it had been revealed as a counterfeit, a cheap imitation of the real thing. And I, the unsuspecting fool, had treasured it as priceless. The first stage of grief is denial, they say. But there was no room for denial here, not with the doctor's medical certainty in their guilty faces. I was catapulted straight into a maelstrom of anger and profound, gut-wrenching pain. The long, silent drive home, alone, was just the beginning of my descent. The drive home from the hospital felt like an out-of-body experience. I vaguely remember the sterile corridors, the sympathetic yet clueless nurse at the checkout, the way Mia refused to meet my eyes, and Carol's tight-lipped silence, her arm possessively around Mia's shoulders as if I were the threat. I'd insisted on driving myself. I couldn't bear to be in the same car as them, breathing the same air thick with their lies. The city lights blurred past, a meaningless smear of color. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Each traffic light, each stop sign, felt like an eternity. My mind was a whirlwind, replaying the scene in the hospital room, the doctor's careful, clinical words, Mia's eventual, tearful confession, and Carol's stony-faced attempts at damage control. It was true. All of it. The baby, the beautiful, innocent little girl I had held in my arms just hours before, wasn't mine. The affair, a sordid, cheap betrayal that had been going on for months, culminating in a pregnancy Mia and her mother had conspired to pass off as mine. How could they? The question hammered at my skull, relentless and brutal. How could Mia, the woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, betray me so completely? And Carol, her mother, who I had treated with respect, with affection even, how could she enable such a monstrous deception? When Mia had finally broken down in the hospital, the story that tumbled out was fragmented, choked with sobs and self-pity. But the core of it was clear. A brief, rekindled flame with an old boyfriend from before we'd met. A man she claimed meant nothing. It was a mistake, Mark, a terrible mistake, she cried, tears streaming down her face. I was going to tell you, I swear, but then I found out I was pregnant, and I panicked. Panicked? Was that what this was? A 9-month, meticulously orchestrated lie, born out of panic? It sounded more like calculated self-preservation. And her mother had been her rock, her confidant, her co-conspirator through it all. Carol had advised her not to tell me, had helped her fudge the conception dates, had coached her on how to act, what to say. Carol had been the architect of the lie, Mia the willing participant. The two people I should have been able to trust most in the world had formed an unholy alliance against me. The betrayal was so profound, so multifaceted, it was hard to even comprehend the scale of it. It wasn't just a physical act of infidelity, it was a psychological assault, a complete dismantling of my reality. I got home to our empty house, the house we had filled with dreams, now echoing with the silence of my shattered life. The nursery, painted that soft, hopeful yellow, felt like a tomb. The crib I had assembled with such care, the tiny clothes folded neatly in the drawers, the mobile with its gently turning animals, each object was a fresh stab of pain. I walked through the rooms, a ghost in my own home, touching things, trying to reconcile the life I thought I had with the ugly truth that had been revealed. Every photograph, every shared memento, seemed to mock me. Our wedding album, sitting on the coffee table, felt like a work of fiction. Was any of it real? Had she ever truly loved me? Or had I been a convenience, a safe bet, a fool she could easily manipulate? Sleep was impossible that night, and for many nights that followed. I'd close my eyes and see Mia's face, her mother's face, the innocent face of the baby. I'd hear the doctor's voice, the hushed whispers of Mia and Carol, the echoes of my own naive excitement. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest, a knot in my stomach. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in an ocean of grief and anger. The practicalities of the situation were a nightmare. Mia and the baby were still at the hospital for a couple more days. Carol was staying with her. I was alone in the house, left to pick up the pieces of my life. What was I supposed to do? Where did we go from here? Could a marriage survive this? Could I ever look at Mia again without seeing the betrayal in her eyes? Could I ever forgive her? Forgive her mother? The question swirled, unanswerable, tormenting. I thought about calling my brother, my closest friends, but the shame was overwhelming. How could I admit this had happened to me? How could I articulate the sheer magnitude of their deceit? I felt utterly alone, isolated in my misery. The few times Mia tried to call from the hospital, I couldn't bring myself to answer. What could she possibly say that would make any difference? Her apologies, if she even offered any, would be empty, meaningless against the backdrop of her actions. Her mother, I knew, would be coaching her, telling her what to say, how to try and salvage the situation, not for my sake, but for theirs. The thought filled me with a cold rage. They were probably already spinning a narrative, a way to minimize their culpability, perhaps even to subtly blame me. Had I been distant? Had I not been attentive enough? The classic excuses of the unfaithful. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that they would try to manipulate me, to guilt me, to wear me down. The bond between Mia and Carol was formidable. They had already proven they were capable of anything to protect their secrets and their interests. In those initial days, the emotional toll was immense. I oscillated between a deep, heart-wrenching sadness and a burning, consuming anger. Sometimes, I would just sit and stare into space, numb, unable to process anything. Other times, I would pace the house like a caged animal, punching pillows, cursing their names. I barely ate. I barely slept. My work suffered. I was a wreck, a shadow of my former self. The world, which had once seemed so full of color and promise, now looked gray and bleak. The future I had envisioned, the family I had longed for, had been stolen from me, built on a foundation of lies. And as the initial shock began to wear off, a new feeling started to emerge from the depths of my pain, a steely resolve. I had been a fool, yes. I had been naive, but I would not be a victim. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my trust for gullibility. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The betrayal was not just Mia's, it was Carol's too. Carol, who had smiled at me, shared meals with me, accepted my help and affection, all while knowing she was actively participating in a scheme to destroy my life. Her role in this somehow felt even more insidious. Mia's betrayal was a wound to the heart. Carol's was a corruption of something almost sacred, the trust you place in family, even in-laws. I started to see her in a new light, not as a doting mother, but as a master manipulator, a puppeteer pulling the strings. And Mia, her willing puppet. The image was chilling, but it also brought a strange kind of clarity. I wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife. I was dealing with a carefully orchestrated conspiracy. And if they thought I would just roll over and accept this, they were in for a rude awakening. The grief was still there, a raw, gaping wound, but now it was mingled with a burgeoning determination. A determination to uncover the whole truth, and a determination to ensure that they faced the consequences of their actions. The game wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The first step was to get Mia and her mother out of my house. The thought of them returning here, to the home I had built, the home they had defiled with their lies, was unbearable. When Mia called again, her voice small and tearful, asking when I was coming to get them, when they could come home, I finally answered. My voice was cold, devoid of the warmth it once held for her. "You're not coming home, Mia," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Neither of you are." Find somewhere else to go. There was a shocked silence on the other end, then a torrent of pleas, of excuses, of promises. Carol got on the phone, her voice sharp, accusatory. Mark, you can't do this. Mia just had a baby. She needs support. You're being cruel. Cruel? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. You want to talk about cruel, Carol? I shot back, my own anger flaring. Let's talk about the last 9 months. Let's talk about looking me in the eye every single day while you knew my wife was pregnant with another man's child. Don't you dare talk to me about cruelty. I told them to have Carol take Mia and the baby to her place. I would pack some of their immediate essentials, things for the baby, and leave them on the porch. After that, they were not to contact me unless it was through a lawyer. The silence that followed that statement was telling. They hadn't expected this. They had expected me to be heartbroken, yes, but ultimately malleable, perhaps even guilt-ridden enough to try and make it work for the sake of the child I had, until very recently, believed was mine. The decision to separate myself physically from them was the first act of reclaiming my sanity, my space. Packing those bags was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every tiny onesie, every soft blanket, was a reminder of the future that had been stolen. I found a small, silver rattle, a gift from my own mother, given to me when I told her I was going to be a dad. My mother, who had been so overjoyed, who was already knitting sweaters and planning visits. How was I going to tell her? The thought of that conversation, of breaking her heart too, added another layer to my despair. But as I sealed the boxes and placed them outside, a small measure of peace settled over me. It was a step, a painful, agonizing step, but a step forward nonetheless. The house felt emptier, but also cleaner, as if a toxic presence had been exorcised. The battle was far from over, but I had drawn the first line in the sand. They would not break me. I would survive this, and I would make damn sure they understood the full scope of the devastation they had wrought. The thought of revenge wasn't fully formed yet, not in any concrete way. But the desire for justice, for accountability, was a burning ember in my soul, slowly kindling into a flame. They had written the script for the past 9 months of my life. Now, it was my turn to write the ending. My mind kept replaying a conversation Mia and I had, maybe 6 months into the pregnancy. We were talking about names, and I'd suggested a family name from my side, a name I'd always loved, always imagined giving to my firstborn son. Mia had been strangely resistant, unusually so. She'd made some excuse about it not flowing well with our last name, but her reaction had been odd. Now, it made a sickening kind of sense. She probably already knew it wasn't a boy, or perhaps she simply couldn't bear to associate a name from my family with a child that wasn't mine, a constant reminder of her deceit. The little signs, the subtle inconsistencies I had dismissed, now paraded through my memory, each one a fresh indictment. Carol's overly enthusiastic reassurances whenever I'd expressed even the slightest concern about Mia's fatigue or mood swings during the pregnancy. Oh, that's perfectly normal, dear. Every pregnancy is different. Her knowing glances at Mia, glances I had misinterpreted as mother-daughter bonding, now seemed like signals in their secret war against my trust. The web of their lies was so intricate, so carefully woven, it was a perverse masterpiece of deception. And the casual way they had expected to get away with it, that was perhaps the most insulting part of all. Did they think I was that stupid? That unobservant? Or did they simply not care about the consequences? So confident were they in their ability to manipulate me and the situation. The anger I felt was a clean, sharp thing now, cutting through the fog of grief. It gave me focus. It gave me purpose. They had made their choices. Now, they would have to live with them. And I would make sure the truth, in all its ugly glory, came to light. The first few days after kicking Mia and Carol out were a blur of lawyers and paperwork. I found a shark of a divorce attorney, a woman named Helen, whose no-nonsense demeanor was exactly what I needed. I laid out the whole sordid story, sparing no detail. Her expression, initially one of professional detachment, slowly morphed into one of thinly veiled disgust at what Mia and Carol had done. "This is egregious," she said, her voice tight. "The deception regarding paternity, especially with the mother-in-law's active involvement, is beyond the pale." She explained the legal ramifications, the process of divorce, and the steps we needed to take to protect my assets and formally establish non-paternity. The words DNA test, fraud, and emotional distress became part of my new vocabulary. It was a harsh, cold reality, but there was also a grim satisfaction in taking concrete action. I was no longer just a passive victim of their scheme. I was actively dismantling the life they had tried to force upon me. While Helen handled the legal front, I began my own quiet investigation. I needed to understand the full extent of Mia's affair. Who was this man? How long had it really been going on? Mia's tearful, hospital bed confession had been light on specifics, painting herself as a victim of a momentary lapse in judgment. I suspected the truth was far uglier. I started with her phone records, which, as we were still technically married and on a family plan, I had access to. The call logs and text messages from around the time of conception were illuminating. There was a recurring number, one I didn't recognize, with a flurry of activity in the weeks leading up to when she found out she was pregnant. Text at odd hours, long calls. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. A quick search of the number online brought up a name, Alex, a photographer she'd worked with on a freelance project a year or so ago. I remembered him vaguely, charming, a bit too slick for my liking. Mia had dismissed my mild unease about him at the time, saying I was being possessive. Now, her defensiveness took on a sinister new meaning. The project had ended, but apparently their communication hadn't. The deeper I dug, the more a clearer picture of Mia's double life emerged. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a sustained affair. There were emails, deleted but recoverable from the cloud, detailing meetups, clandestine weekends away disguised as work trips or girls' weekends. The dates aligned with the probable conception window, a window that decisively excluded me. Each discovery was like a fresh betrayal, peeling back another layer of her deception. Carol's role became clearer too. There were emails between Mia and her mother, discussing how to handle the Mark situation, how to explain away certain absences, how to manage the timeline of the pregnancy. Carol wasn't just a passive accomplice. She was an active strategist, guiding Mia through the treacherous waters of her deceit. She had coached Mia on how to feign morning sickness at the right times, how to subtly deflect my questions about the baby's due date, even suggesting ways to make me feel more involved in the pregnancy to allay any potential suspicions. Reading those exchanges, seeing their callous disregard for my feelings laid bare in black and white, turned my simmering anger into a cold, hard fury. They had treated me like an idiot, a pawn in their selfish game. I also found out, through a discreet inquiry with a mutual acquaintance who worked at the same company as Alex, that he was married. Not just married, but with 2 young children. So, Mia hadn't just betrayed me. She had been involved with a man who was betraying his own family. The sordidness of it all was sickening. This wasn't some grand passion, some tragic love story. This was just cheap, tawdry, and incredibly destructive. The information about Alex being married added another dimension to my plan. It wasn't just about Mia and Carol anymore. There was another victim in this, Alex's wife, and she deserved to know the truth, just as I had. The thought of exposing the affair to Alex's wife wasn't born out of malice towards her, but out of a sense of solidarity. She was an unwitting player in this drama too, and she had a right to know who her husband really was, and who Mia really was. The evidence I gathered was damning. Phone records, emails, even a few incriminating photos Mia had carelessly left on a shared cloud account from one of her work trips that clearly showed her and Alex in a non-professional setting. I compiled it all meticulously, creating a timeline, a narrative of their deceit. It was a painful process, each piece of evidence a fresh twist of the knife, but it was also empowering. I was no longer in the dark. I had the truth, the whole ugly, unvarnished truth. And the truth, as they say, has a way of setting you free, even if that freedom comes at a terrible price. My plan for justice began to take shape. It wouldn't be about screaming or yelling or public confrontations, though the temptation was there. It would be about a calm, calculated exposure of the facts to the people who mattered, to the people whose opinions Mia and Carol cared about. Their carefully constructed facade of respectability was about to crumble. I imagined their shock, their humiliation, when their perfect little world came crashing down around them, not because of my rage, but because of the undeniable weight of their own actions. The justice I sought wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense, not about causing them pain for pain's sake. It was about accountability. It was about stripping away their lies and forcing them to stand in the harsh light of truth, to be seen for who they truly were. The hardest part of this investigation was maintaining my composure in my limited interactions with Mia and Carol, which were now mostly through lawyers or brief, unavoidable encounters related to separating our lives. They were trying to paint me as the angry, unreasonable husband, the one who was overreacting. Carol, in particular, was adept at playing the concerned mother, telling anyone who would listen how I had abandoned Mia in her time of need. The hypocrisy was galling, but I held my tongue, knowing that my moment would come. I let them build their narrative, unaware that I was assembling an arsenal of facts that would blow it to smithereens. My lawyer, Helen, was impressed with the thoroughness of my evidence. "This will make the divorce proceedings much smoother on our end," she commented, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "They won't have a leg to stand on if they try to contest anything or paint you as the villain." She advised me to keep it all under wraps until the opportune moment. A strategic reveal would be far more effective. The baby, the innocent child at the center of this maelstrom, was named Lily by Mia. I only knew this through the legal paperwork. I had no contact, no desire for it. It was a strange feeling. For months, I had eagerly anticipated fatherhood, poured all my love and hope into this child. Now, she was a symbol of the deepest betrayal I had ever experienced. I felt a profound sadness for her, for the complicated life she had been born into, but I knew I couldn't be a part of it. Any connection to her would be a constant, painful reminder of Mia's deceit and Carol's complicity. My path to healing, I knew, lay in a clean break. As the days turned into weeks, the raw, searing pain began to dull, replaced by a hardened resolve. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but it no longer paralyzed me. It fueled me. My focus shifted from why me to what next. I was determined to emerge from this stronger, not broken. Mia and Carol had tried to destroy me, to make a fool of me. They had underestimated my resilience. They had underestimated my intelligence. And they had definitely underestimated my capacity for ensuring that justice, in its own cold, methodical way, would be served. The stage was being set, not for a messy, emotional outburst, but for a quiet, devastating takedown. The plan for what I privately called the reckoning wasn't born in a single flash of inspiration, but rather coalesced slowly, piece by painstaking piece, as I sifted through the wreckage of my marriage. It wasn't about theatrical revenge, not really. I had no desire to key their cars or shout obscenities in the street. My pain was too deep for such superficial gestures. What I craved was something more profound. The dismantling of their carefully constructed world of lies, the exposure of their true natures to the people whose opinions they valued, and the reclaiming of my own narrative. They had cast me as the villain in their twisted drama, the unreasonable husband who abandoned a new mother. I was about to recast the roles, with them as the antagonists and me as the survivor armed with undeniable truth. My strategy had several prongs. First, the legal aspect. Helen, my lawyer, was already hard at work ensuring the divorce would be swift and that Mia would get nothing more than what was legally mandated, which, given her infidelity and the fraud surrounding the paternity, wouldn't be much from our shared assets. I had worked hard for what we had, and the thought of her benefiting further from her deceit was galling. We made sure to file for divorce on grounds of adultery, and the evidence I had compiled, the phone records, emails, photos, made that an open and shut case. The official court-ordered DNA test confirming I was not Lily's father was another crucial piece. It was a cold, clinical procedure, but the results provided an irrefutable, legal foundation for everything that was to follow. No more whispers, no more he said, she said. Just a scientific fact that invalidated their entire 9-month charade. The second prong was social, and this was where Carol's involvement became a key focus. Carol prided herself on her standing in her community, her church group, her circle of friends. She was the benevolent matriarch, the doting grandmother, the pillar of support. Her image was everything to her. Mia, too, had cultivated a certain persona among our mutual friends and her extended family, the sweet, devoted wife, unfairly maligned by a suddenly cold husband. I decided that these were the audiences who needed to see the true script. I wasn't going to engage in a smear campaign. I was simply going to present the facts, calmly and rationally, supported by evidence. I began drafting an email, a carefully worded statement detailing the affair, the deception about the pregnancy, and Carol's instrumental role in perpetuating the lie. It included anonymized excerpts from their own emails to each other, the ones where they discussed how to manage me and the timeline. It mentioned the DNA test results. It was devastatingly factual, devoid of overt anger, which I knew would make it even more impactful. The sheer coldness of their premeditated actions, laid out in plain language, would be far more damning than any emotional outburst from me. The third prong, and perhaps the one that required the most delicate handling, involved Alex, Mia's affair partner, and his unsuspecting wife, Sarah. I felt a strange kinship with Sarah, another victim of Mia's and Alex's selfishness. She deserved to know. After much deliberation, I decided the most ethical way to approach this was to send an anonymous package to her containing evidence of the affair, copies of the emails between Mia and Alex, a few of the less explicit photos, and a brief, typed note explaining that this information was being shared because she had a right to know the truth about her husband and the mother of his new child. I made sure there was nothing in it that could trace back to me directly. My quarrel was with Mia and Carol. Alex and Sarah had their own mess to sort out, but Sarah needed the tools to understand what she was dealing with. I had no idea how she would react, or what it would do to their family, but the truth, however painful, was paramount. Preparing these disclosures was a grim task. Each piece of evidence I reviewed was a reminder of the pain, but it also solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the principle of the thing. It was about truth and accountability. Mia and Carol had operated in the shadows, relying on secrecy and manipulation. I was about to flood their world with light. I timed everything carefully. I wanted the legal proceedings to be well underway, the DNA results officially recorded. I planned to send the email to our mutual friends, Mia's extended family, some of whom I genuinely liked and felt sorry for, as they too had been deceived, and Carol's precious church group and social circle all at once. I gathered email addresses meticulously, a digital Grim Reaper preparing to deliver his payload. The day before I planned to hit send on that email, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and grim satisfaction. This was the point of no return. There would be fallout, ugliness, recriminations. But there would also be truth. I thought about Mia, about Carol. Had they ever considered the full consequences of their actions? Did they ever imagine it would come to this? Probably not. They had likely assumed I would eventually get over it, or that they could manage the situation as they always had. They had underestimated my pain, and they had underestimated my determination not to let them get away with it. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was about reclaiming my own dignity, my own story. I would no longer be the silent, suffering fool. I would be the man who refused to be broken, the man who brought the truth to light, no matter how uncomfortable it was. The night before D-Day, as I ironically called it in my head, I barely slept, not from anxiety about their reaction, but from a sense of impending closure. It wouldn't fix what was broken, it wouldn't erase the pain, but it would rebalance the scales, at least a little. The power they had held over me, the power of their secret, was about to be neutralized. I thought about the baby, Lily. She was innocent in all of this, a tiny life caught in the crossfire of adult failings. My actions weren't aimed at her, but inevitably, she would be affected. It was a sobering thought, one that reinforced my decision to handle this with as much factual detachment as possible, rather than venomous rage. The goal wasn't to destroy them emotionally, though emotional distress would be an unavoidable byproduct for them. The goal was to strip away their defenses of lies and force them to confront the reality of what they had done. In the eyes of the world they had so carefully curated, the calm before the storm was almost over. Soon, the winds of truth would begin to blow. The execution of the reckoning was almost anticlimactic in its initial stages. One quiet Tuesday morning, after Helen confirmed that all the crucial legal documents were filed and Mia and Carol had been served, I sat at my computer, took a deep breath, and sent the email. It went out to over 100 addresses: friends, family, colleagues, members of Carol's church, her bridge club, even a few of Mia's old college acquaintances whose opinions I knew she valued. The subject line was simple: the truth about Mia, Carol, and my marriage. Then, I drove to a post office in a different town and mailed the anonymous package to Sarah, Alex's wife. After that, there was nothing to do but wait. The first ripple came within hours. A text from my brother. "Just read your email. Call me. I'm so sorry, man." Then a call from one of Mia's cousins, a kind woman I'd always gotten along with, her voice full of shock and sympathy. "Mark, I had no idea. This is horrible. How are you holding up?" These initial responses were a balm to my bruised soul. People were seeing the truth, and they were reacting not with judgment towards me, but with understanding and support. The narrative was shifting. I was no longer the cold, heartless husband. I was the betrayed party, finally telling my side of the story. The real storm broke the next day. That's when Carol's phone must have started ringing off the hook. I heard later, through the grapevine, that the pastor of her church called her in for a discussion. Several members of her various social committees quietly distanced themselves. The carefully constructed edifice of Carol's respectability began to crumble, brick by brick. The woman who had prided herself on her moral standing was now exposed as a manipulator and a liar. There was no shouting, no public shaming from my end, just the quiet, undeniable weight of the evidence I had presented. Her friends and acquaintances were drawing their own conclusions, and those conclusions were not favorable to her. The whispers in her community, I imagined, were now about her, not about me. That, in itself, was a profound form of justice. Mia's world also imploded. Friends who had initially offered her sympathy, believing her carefully curated version of events, were now confronted with the unvarnished truth of her affair and the paternity deception. Some were angry, feeling they too had been manipulated. Others simply faded away, unwilling to be associated with such a scandal. Her attempts to play the victim fell flat when faced with the cold, hard facts laid out in my email, especially the excerpts from her own communications with her mother. The poor, abandoned new mother narrative was dead on arrival. She was now seen as what she was, a woman who had engaged in a lengthy affair and, with her mother's help, had tried to pass off another man's child as her husband's. The shame and social isolation she must have experienced were, I'm sure, immense. It was a harsh consequence, but one she had brought entirely upon herself. As for Alex and Sarah, I never found out directly what happened, and I didn't seek to. That was their private pain, their private reckoning. However, a few weeks later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Alex had suddenly moved out of his family home. His social media, once full of happy family pictures, went dark. I can only imagine the devastation my package wrought in their lives. I felt a pang of regret for Sarah and her children, but my conviction that she deserved to know the truth remained. What she chose to do with that truth was her decision. Mia's affair had consequences that rippled far beyond our marriage, and it was only right that all parties involved were aware of the full picture. The divorce proceedings were, as Helen predicted, remarkably straightforward. Faced with the irrefutable evidence of adultery and paternity fraud, Mia and her lawyer had little room to maneuver. She tried, of course. There were attempts to claim emotional distress, to paint herself as a victim of circumstance, to angle for a larger settlement. But Helen was relentless, shutting down every attempt with cold, hard facts. In the end, the settlement was minimal, strictly adhering to the legal requirements, and I retained the majority of our shared assets, including the house, which I was already in the process of selling. I wanted no reminders of the life we had shared there. The final decree of divorce arrived on a crisp autumn day. Holding it in my hand, I didn't feel elation, just a quiet sense of relief, of a chapter finally, irrevocably closed. Carol, I heard, became somewhat of a recluse. Her social life, once so vibrant, dwindled. The respect and admiration she had craved and curated for so long had evaporated, replaced by suspicion and disappointment from her peers. She had hitched her wagon so firmly to Mia's deceit, and when that deceit was exposed, she went down with it. There was a certain tragic irony to it. In her desperate attempt to control Mia's life and protect her from the consequences of her actions, Carol had ended up destroying her own reputation and social standing. Mia, from what I gathered, moved into a small apartment with Lily. Supported primarily by her mother and, presumably, by Alex, the biological father, though I doubted his support would be enthusiastic or long-lasting given his own marital situation. Her attempts to reach out to me, through pleading texts and voicemails, eventually stopped when she realized I was resolute in my decision to have no further contact. The justice wasn't loud or explosive. It was the quiet, inevitable consequence of their own choices, a slow unraveling of the world they had built on lies. There was a grim satisfaction in that, a sense that the universe, in its own way, had righted a profound wrong. It wasn't a victory that brought joy, but it brought a sense of peace, a sense that I could finally begin to heal, knowing that the truth was out and they were facing the repercussions of their destructive actions. The power was mine again, not because I had crushed them, but because I had reclaimed my life and my story from their deception. Looking back, the months following the discovery and the execution of the reckoning were a crucible. I lost a version of myself in that fire, the naive, unconditionally trusting man I once was. That man is gone, and I don't mourn his passing. In his place stands someone more cautious, more discerning, but also, I hope, more resilient. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined, not just because of the infidelity, but because of the calculated, long-term deception orchestrated by Mia and, perhaps even more woundingly, by her mother, Carol. It was a profound lesson in the human capacity for deceit, even from those you believe you know best. The sale of the house was a significant turning point. Walking out of those empty rooms for the last time, I felt a sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't just a house, it was a repository of painful memories, a monument to a life built on lies. Letting it go was symbolic of letting go of that past, of Mia, of the future I once envisioned. I moved into a new apartment in a different part of the city, a place with no shared history, no ghosts in the closets. It was a blank slate, an opportunity to redefine my life on my own terms. Healing hasn't been a linear process. There were good days, filled with a fragile sense of hope, and bad days, where the weight of the betrayal would resurface, a dull ache in my chest. I sought therapy, which was immensely helpful in processing the trauma and rebuilding my sense of self-worth. Talking about it, even to a stranger, helped to demystify the pain, to understand that what happened was not a reflection of my inadequacy, but of their profound moral failings. I learned that forgiveness isn't necessarily about condoning what they did, or even about absolving them. For me, it became about releasing the hold their actions had on my emotional well-being. I don't know if I'll ever truly forgive Mia or Carol in the conventional sense. The wound is too deep, the breach of trust too absolute. But I have reached a point where their memory no longer consumes me with anger or sorrow. They're a part of my past, a painful chapter, but not the defining one. I learned to recognize red flags I had previously dismissed out of love or a desire to avoid conflict. Carol's overbearing nature, her subtle manipulations, Mia's increasing secrecy, these were all warning signs I had ignored. Now, I trust my intuition more. I value honesty and transparency above all else in my relationships, both platonic and potentially romantic, though the latter is something I am approaching with extreme caution. The experience has undoubtedly made me more guarded, but I refuse to let it make me entirely cynical. There are good, trustworthy people in the world, and I am slowly relearning to open myself up to the possibility of genuine connection. My relationship with my own family and true friends deepened. Their unwavering support during the darkest period of my life was a lifeline. It taught me the true meaning of loyalty and unconditional love, a stark contrast to what I had experienced with Mia and Carol. I reconnected with old hobbies, things I had let slide during my marriage. I started hiking again, finding solace in the quiet strength of nature. I focused on my career, finding a sense of purpose and accomplishment there. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. As for Mia and Carol, I hear snippets about them occasionally, through the grapevine. Their lives, from what I understand, are not easy. The social fallout from their actions was significant and lasting. Mia is raising Lily largely on her own, as Alex, true to form, proved to be an unreliable presence. Carol's social standing never recovered. There's a part of me that feels a grim sense of justice in that, but mostly, I feel a kind of detached pity. They wove a tangled web, and ultimately, they ensnared themselves in it. Their choices led them to their current reality. I don't know what the future holds. The scars of their betrayal will always be there, a reminder of a painful past, but they no longer define me. I am stronger than I ever thought possible. I survived an emotional apocalypse and came out the other side, bruised but not broken. There is a quiet satisfaction in that, a sense of hard-won peace. Life is different now, certainly not the life I had planned, but it is my life, authentic and true. And for the first time in a long time, I am looking forward to the future, whatever it may bring, with a sense of cautious optimism and a newfound appreciation for my own resilience. The most important lesson I learned is that while you cannot control the actions of others, you can control how you respond, and you can choose to rise from the ashes, stronger and wiser. Looking back, I realize I lost a part of myself, but I also found something stronger. If you've ever been betrayed, know this: you're not alone, and healing is possible. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories like this one. Until next time, take care of yourself.